Hello, everyone, and welcome to the North Carolina Museum of History and the 21st Annual African American Cultural Celebration. Our presenters, Tim Pigford and Dr. Adrienne Petty, will begin in just a moment, but we want to start with a few notes. Please remember to ask questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to respond to them and share with our presenter. Please note that our presenters and off-camera crew are masked for the safety of everyone. We would like to take a moment to thank the following sponsors of the North Carolina Museum of History Foundation who have helped to make this event possible.
Hello and welcome to the 21st Annual African American Cultural Celebration at the North Carolina Museum of History. I'm your host for the History, Film, and Enterprise segment of the event. My name is Earl Imes, your farmer and historian and curator of African American and agricultural history here at the North Carolina Museum of History. And our theme for the 21st annual event is Black People, Green Planet, Environmental Justice. And we are very thrilled today to have a presentation entitled Phoenix Rising and the Story and the Plight of Black Farmers in America with Mr. Tim Pigford, world famous farmer from Eastern North Carolina, and Dr. Adrienne Petty, professor of history at the College of William and Mary. So thank you, Mr. Tim Pigford, for joining us. And thank you, Dr. Petty, for joining us. We have put together a little small presentation to help cue us along with the title of the event. But first of all, I want to welcome you in person, Tim, to the Museum of History. Thank you so much for joining us. It's an honor and a pleasure and a thrill to be with you again. I always enjoy talking with you and being with you. And want to give you an opportunity to kind of tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, Earl, for having me. My name is Tim Pigford from Washington, North Carolina. And I wished I was still farming, but unfortunately, I'm not farming because of racial discrimination and retaliation from the United States Department of Agriculture and the Department of Justice. In 1997, Janice and I, my wife, filed a lawsuit against USDA, and the suit is entitled Pigford versus Glickman, and it was the largest lawsuit filed against the United States government, and we won. It was a class action lawsuit, and in 2000, we came to a settlement agreement with the USDA. And since then, I have not been able to farm because I was retaliated against for filing the lawsuit. The suit had a payout of a little over $3 billion. And all of the farmers, after 20 some years, still have not been paid. We did not get all that the government had promised in the settlement for us. And a lot of the farmers still have not been paid. And I would like to acknowledge some of the guys that was in the suit. First off, Cecil Brewington from Pender County, Lucius Abram from Georgia, Eddie Slaughter from Georgia, Eddie Ross from Mississippi, Lloyd Schaefer, unfortunately, has passed on from Mississippi, George Hall from Alabama. And I would further like to acknowledge Mr. L.C. Cooper, who is deceased, and L.C. was from North Carolina, and Mr. Alex Cooper from Missouri. And I also like to thank all of the wives who supported the farmers. And my wife has hung in there with me all those years that we sacrificed and fought the government. And I'd like to personally thank her and all the wives who have supported their husband, because we couldn't have done this without their support. And I know I probably can't name everybody, but I appreciate all of the people that was on the suit with us.
Well, that's certainly important, to make those acknowledgments, and thank you again, and thank you, Ms. Clara Pigford, for your help and support. And also Dr. Adrienne Petty, who is a friend and colleague that I was pleasantly surprised to know that you two knew each other and was on this together. And Dr. Petty, would you mind sharing some of how I've known you, and you come from a farm-rich family in the South. And so it's logical how you could hook up, but could you share some more with that and your work with us, please?
Oh, sure. So first of all, I'd just like to thank you for inviting us and organizing this. And I'm just thrilled that Mr. Pigford is on the stage and telling his story. He's always been reluctant to, to share it in public. But Mr. and Mrs. Pigford have been like family to me since I met them. And so I'll first talk about how I got into this in the first place, and how I first met you, Earl, was when I was a graduate student working on my first and only book, which is Standing Their Ground, which deals with small farmers in North Carolina. I was doing research at the state archives where you used to be across the street from the museum, right? And that you were very helpful and instrumental with me and one of my graduate student friends, Devin Fergus, in finding material there.
From Northampton County.
To that old record center, and I found more stuff there. So that's how I met you. And the way that I first got involved in this work was a challenge that my grandfather, who was a farmer and a brick mason, put to me years ago when I was a little girl. When I would go to South Carolina to spend time with them, he would tell me, "You don't know nothing about country living." And so that kind of inspired me, because I think my grandfather, like my grandparents, both of them, like a lot of farm families, they worked so hard to get their children educated. And all 5 of their children went to college and pursued professional careers. But I think there was a part of him that regretted that me and a lot of my and my cousins and sister and everything didn't know the kinds of things that he couldn't day by day pass on that heritage to us, because we lived, away. So that's how I got interested in farming as a general topic, and then learning much more about the workings of farms, the meaning of farms to families. And that just sent me on this journey, and it's kind of become my life's work. So the way that Mr. Pigford and I met, and I'll get faster so we don't use up all the time. The way that we met was, I have another graduate school friend, Dr. Monica Gisolfi, who's a associate professor of history at University of North Carolina, Wilmington. And she was teaching a class, or I can't remember exactly how it happened, but she said to me, I have a student named Pigford in the history department, Tim Pigford. And I said, the Tim Pigford? And we spent a lot of time trying to figure out, was this Tim Pigford like the son of Tim Pigford or some other Tim? So it was like, you could have been telling me I was about to meet Michael Jackson or Prince. I mean, that's how excited I became to learn that there was an opportunity that I could meet Mr. Pigford. So she connected us, and then he had heard of me, which blew me away, because he'd read an article that I published on the GI Bill and the farm programs in North Carolina. So that's been years ago, and ever since then, we have been in contact.
Well, see, that's a perfect segue, because part of and Tim and I, this is so serendipitous how we all reunited, because Tim and I had been talking on the phone for literally, 10, 12, 13 years, had never met each other in person, but we would have these long conversations. And so when we talked about a year or so ago, and he called me and says, do you know Dr. Adrienne Petty? I said, yes. So we got back together, and we finally met at his home in Washington, North Carolina, this past summer, and had a wonderful time and experience and rehashing. But you and your work is so important, and thank you again for it and what you have been producing. You kind of getting us started on this conversation about your work in the GI Bill and what you were finding with Black farmers and the GI Bill. Can you share some of that with our audience, please?
Sure. Well, so many, World War II, so many people who served during World War II and came back, didn't get to share in the GI Bill in the same way that we traditionally think of people taking advantage of it. Because the most well-known programs are, the grants for college education and the opportunities to gain home ownership, which really contributed to the takeoff of the middle class in the United States, especially the white middle class. And that's not to say that no Black people took advantage of the educational loans. There are plenty of graduates of North Carolina A&T, Central, Howard University, East Elizabeth City, all of the, especially Black colleges and universities, a lot of them got their start through the GI Bill at those institutions. But the vast majority of African Americans, and I would even extend this to rural, poorer white people from North Carolina, took advantage of the GI Bill through lesser known programs like the farm training program, the on-the-job training program, and to a far lesser extent, the farm loan program. So there was kind of a pecking order of who got what. The farm loans were more likely to go to white Midwestern farmers, then white Southern farmers, and then maybe Black farmers. So that's one of those instances of discrimination that we see within the USDA, but it was also on the basis of class inequality and racism. And so that's the GI Bill article and later a chapter of my book, in which I just explore, how this government program was differentially beneficial to people, not really benefiting Black farmers as much as it benefited others.
So, and again, tell us the title of that book again, please.
It's Standing Their Ground, Small Farmers in North Carolina Since the Civil War.
Excellent. And because part of the questions we're getting in the chat about just that, and that is available on Amazon?
Yes, it's available on Amazon.
Very good, yes. So coming back to you, Tim, and we've had so many conversations, but along this line, you shared with me recently the story of a United States Marine who had served 24 years with his country and yet could not get a farm loan. Could you expand on that and maybe some other similar stories?
Yeah, there was this guy in Georgia. He wanted to be in farming from high school, and he volunteered went into the Marine Corps thinking that he would get an opportunity to farm. And he ends up spending 24 years. He did 6 combat tours, and he came out and a couple of years ago, and he has started farming on his own. And then he went and applied at FSA, and he finally got a loan. Now, we are not sure if it was a farm ownership loan or if it was an operating loan, but he got it through this special program that the government has for veterans who are interested in farming. But what happened, it was the same old discrimination. There was guys like Cecil Brewington, for instance. His uncle and brother went to Vietnam, and they served honorably in Vietnam. When they came out, the 3 of them were wanting to farm.
In Pender County, North Carolina.
Right, in Pender County. They could not get a loan. And so Cecil ends up being a part. His case was filed shortly after our case, and his case was merged into the Pigford case. But it's the same old discrimination, whether it was in 1997 or where it was in 2002 or 2015. It's the same problem. And it is a shame that a veteran who puts his life on the line, George Hall from Alabama, fitted in the same category. And to have to go through this kind of discrimination is just ridiculous. And so what they did, what attracted me to that story, it was published in the Southeast Farm Press in December. And when I read the article, I just couldn't believe this was still going on.
And today, in 2021, 2022.
Today's time, even after we filed this lawsuit.
25 years ago.
And we win the suit, Black farmers are still having problems in getting loans.
So to be sure for our audience, 1997 is the year that the Pigford case was adjudicated. Yes, yeah. August 1997, during the Bill Clinton administration.
Yeah.
Yes. So we're talking 25 years later, and they're still intransigence.
And you know, it's a shame. Again, is discrimination on top of discrimination, where after all of this time, a lot of guys have passed because of age. And to have this strung out and still all the cases have not been paid out is ridiculous. And I hope the Biden administration will, end this thing. It should be ended. And so the opportunity for young farmers coming into the business that want to farm. And there was a case right here in North Carolina over at Greensboro. We had this young Black guy. He wanted to farm. His academic advisor at a land-grant university was trying to talk him out of farming. And, you know, a land-grant university, whether it's Black or white, the whole purpose is agriculture. That's the whole thing of these land-grant schools. When this act was passed back in
the Morrill Act,
1862.
Yeah, the Morrill Act of 1862, exactly. Yes, sir. And the Morrill Act, and the Morrill number 2, Morrill Act 2.
Yeah, but to have a academic advisor at a land-grant institution that's trying to talk a young person out of going into agriculture, that was his dream. And he did not listen to that advisor. And he's now farming.
Very good for him.
Yeah.
So Dr. Petty, some questions have come up in the chat related to just exactly what Mr. Tim Pigford was saying about what the current Biden administration is doing to reverse and to address this systemic discrimination within the USDA. And is there anything that you could speak to about that along that line?
Well, the Biden administration first tried putting up money in the rescue plan, the COVID-related relief bill, to aid African American farmers. This isn't kind of addressing the lack of payouts in the Pigford suit. This is a separate thing related to relief. And it's been challenged, it's being challenged in court for, reverse discrimination. That's
reverse racism.
Racism, yes. That's always the challenge.
That's an oxymoron, isn't it? Reverse racism. But anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, well, my point is that it's that is one of the challenges that the USDA has faced in trying to do anything to address or to create programs that benefit not only Black farmers, but they have a whole categories of farmers who they term disadvantaged: Native American, Latino, Asian American, and I think even marginal women farmers. Whenever they try to, address programs directly to that group, they encounter they encounter lawsuits. And so that's one of the things that's going on now. But there are efforts. There is a USDA Equity Commission that's been set up to help the Biden administration in finding ways to address this past discrimination. And another thing that's happening is that I think is really, really creative and smart is to tie the this justice and equity for farmers overall to environmental justice, and trying to think through how you can both promote environmental justice and protect the soil, do all of the things that need to be done because of climate change, but also address all of this ongoing and past racism that has placed a lot of Black farmers at a disadvantage, and also to address the general problem in, overall in agriculture, where the largest producers get most of the government benefits. Like, one more point I'll make, when the Trump administration did its COVID relief plan, something like, I wish I had the statistics, but most farmers got something like $200, whether they're Black, white, whatever their background. And Black farmers got even less. But who got the top payouts? The big producers there in North Carolina. It was all these one company, but that was able to apply and get millions of money that was supposed to go to aid farmers who had lost money because of COVID. So that just shows you the vast discrimination and inequality that's in our U.S. agriculture system and persists.
The vicious cycle that has gone on, almost in your word, persists, literally going back to slavery before 1865, when most of the people who were enslaved were in fact farmers, right? And never ever compensated for that farming and the wealth that contributed toward this great civilization that we call North Carolina, and in the South in general, and United States altogether. And so we're coming, even after 1865 Reconstruction, and not to belabor that, but coming back to you, Tim, you're a multi-generational farmer. Your father was a farmer?
And my grandfather.
And your grandfather, and tell us a little bit about them and kind of their plight, and how you have taken up that mantle.
Well, I learned the love of agriculture from my uncle by marriage, and by the time I was 8, he had me on the tractor, and my grandfather had bought a M John Deere, and he bought it in '51 in October, and I was born the next month. In November. So I learned how to drive a tractor. I was so small, my legs wouldn't even reach the clutch. So I had to slide up to the edge of the seat. But that started my love for it. Both of my grandfathers were able to attain land.
And what were their names?
So when
What were your grandfather's names?
on my mother's side, it was Jeremiah Newkirk. On my daddy's side, Jim Pigford.
And what counties were they farming and living in then?
What crops?
What counties?
Pender County.
Pender County?
Uh-huh.
Okay. And for those who don't know, Pender County is just north of Wilmington, North Carolina.
Right.
Good. So your grandfathers and your father, and your father's name is? What is
Tim Pigford.
Tim Pigford Sr.
Hmm?
Your father's Tim Pigford Sr.
No, I'm not a junior.
Okay.
His name was Timothy Wright. And my cousin, one of my cousins, brought me into this world.
Okay.
And she was, and Mama said the only thing she wanted was to have my middle name that she wanted. And that's why I'm not a junior. But I insisted and was determined. I told Janice our first child was, if he was a boy, was going to be Timothy C. Pigford Jr. And so we have that happen, and we have 2 sons. And see, one of the sad parts of this is the impact that this discrimination has placed upon the family. And it's one of these untold stories. Yes, we have gone through a lot of emotional stuff as farmers. But when you have 2 sons, and a lot of farmers, their sons and daughters will not come into this business because of this racial discrimination. Without a drastic change, our 2 sons would never farm. But we do hope that we have two of the most lovable grandkids in the world. And we hope that one day that they will take interest in farming. Janice always worked with them in the summertime, and she plants stuff like cucumbers and watermelons around the house, stuff that will grow in small spaces. So when they come, they get to put seeds in the ground. And when they come back in the fall of the year, they get a chance to harvest that. And they get the biggest kick out of going out and, picking cucumbers. They put this straw hats on. we take them to the blueberry fields, to the strawberry patches, and we want them to learn and develop that love of farming that was a legacy in our family that my grandparents went through and my uncle. And and I wish for all of the farm families that a lot of wives ended up leaving their husbands because of this. And a lot of the kids went away, got education, and never came back to the farming side because what they saw of their parents went through. Our oldest son had a nervous breakdown. The psychiatrist said that all of his troubles stem from the fact of what we went through. He was picked on in school. We went a year and 12 days. We didn't have any lights in our house. There was no electricity. And you having a child go into school, other kids in the community picking on him about that fact. He just couldn't handle it. He was enrolled at A&T, majoring in agriculture, and he just couldn't handle it.
And the things that you speak of are the revenge motives of the parties who are inflicting the discrimination, and so that's important to note. I know you were sharing just so many stories about that we don't really have so much time to go into. But on the screen are your two boys, and you mentioned your two grandsons, and I know how difficult it is for you as a farmer to talk about this, and I know myself as a farmer always wanting to think about the next generation and passing things down. And that's still that opportunity because you're planting that seed with them, learning that from Miss Janice and you, and taking that on. It's really something that will come to fruition. And not to belabor Dr. Petty, you're, even though, and I say, even though, quote unquote, you're an academic, you're a scholar, we still consider you a farmer, an agriculturalist. And yes. So, you kind of alluded to your family in South Carolina. What part of South Carolina and what were they farming? And could you maybe share a little bit of that with us too?
Oh, sure. They were, well, when Mr. Pigford talked about driving the tractor, that reminded me, my mother said that my grandfather took 2 bricks and tied them to each foot when she was 6 years old so she could reach the clutch.
Oh boy, that's good. That's good.
So yeah, but anyway, they had a farm in Richland County, right on the outskirts of Columbia, South Carolina. Like in my lifetime, that their farm was kind of incorporated into the city, from what I understand, but it was in Richland County. And my grandparents raised wheat and cotton mostly. And then everything they ate, I mean, my grandmother kept a pretty sizable garden, and they also raised cows, pigs, chickens.
Now that's interesting. So your family were Black cotton farmers.
Yes.
And yeah, and that's important to note because we have some of those still today in North Carolina and South Carolina, and it's a cash crop, and we should be encouraged beyond the idea of cotton from slavery and to what this 21st economy can do as far as cotton and agriculture.
Really, the architect of this whole thing was my great grandmother. She was the one. My great grandfather was also a brick mason, and he spent a lot of time traveling. He built was the foreman on a lot of construction sites around the South. The presentation earlier reminded me of him with the man in Wilson. But anyway, but so she was the one who ran the farm. She was the one who bought a lot of extra acreage. And so, I mean, just the role of Black women, Mr. Pigford always lifts up Mrs. Pigford, which I appreciate about. Yeah. He recognizes what a sacrifice it has been for her and his entire family, what they have endured. But, when I know that, Mr. Pigford's mother, grandmother, all of those women also played a big role in sustaining these farms. And so just to acknowledge the role that women have played is very important.
Very important, very significant. And you just alluded to something that's very significant because in the absence of USDA support over the years, over the decades toward Black farmers, your grandfather, like a lot of Black farmers, had to do a second or a third thing. And in his case, he was a builder and a brick mason. And we see here, the Pigford settlements, as we mentioned, stem from the 1997 class action lawsuit. that accused the USDA of discriminating against Black farmers through loans and other policies, and failing to investigate or respond to discrimination claims. And so they settled with the Black farmers, agreeing to compensate them with cash and debt relief in what became known, as you mentioned, Mr. Pigford, Tim Pigford, or Pigford 1 in 1997. But the short deadline to file the claim left out many of the eligible farmers. And so that led to Pigford 2, which is the 2010 settlement, in which the federal government agreed to pay $1.25 billion to claimants left out of Pigford 1. And so what we have here on the screen is a photograph of a farmer from 100 years ago in eastern North Carolina, a man named Macon Uncle Bud, as he was called, Parham, who sharecropped on white farmers' land and raised money, but still could not get a loan to purchase his own farm. And so his story that was shared with me by his daughter, Miss Elizabeth Parham Wiggins, was that he was a builder and a master builder, so much so that he actually was one of the contractors or builders of Fort Bragg in the early 40s. And that money was used in addition to his building to purchase 2 farms in Wake and Johnston County without the assistance at all of the United States Department of Agriculture. And so that's almost a modus operandi type of story that we have seen over the years, as you and I have seen as historians, and document this. So as I mentioned, Tim Pigford was a plaintiff in the Pigford versus United States Department of Agriculture landmark case, what many people today refer to as the Black Farmers case. And so during the years of the 1990s, you see a photograph here that Mr. Pigford shared with us, that led where he led other farmers at rallies. He mentioned some of those farmers by name, who are also pictured in this photograph, to rallies in Washington, D.C. for equality and just simple fairness. That's all, just nothing special, no handouts, but just fairness. If you're going to have a U.S. Department of Agriculture, administer it fairly to all citizens. So this is a rare interview, and I want to thank Mr. Tim Pigford again, because quite frankly, our audience should know he doesn't give interviews. And we are very fortunate here at the North Carolina Museum of History to have him in our presence and as part of this environmental justice African American cultural celebration. This is a picture of a business in North Carolina where you're on the cover and you're doing an interview about how the outcomes are not being really in the spirit of good faith meted out. And on the left-hand side of the picture is an artifact from our Museum of History collection from 1920s, which is segregation, quite frankly, whites only, which was the mantra for the USDA. If you're going to apply basically whites only without saying. So, and this was to the notice of Black farmers and others in 1929. But this Business North Carolina article was published. Can you tell us a little bit more about this and that article, Tim, please?
They had called me about doing the article, and they came down, and the cover page was taken, obvious, in a tobacco field, and it was a very good article. Ed Martin wrote the article, and I think it really helped people to try to understand what we was going through. There's been other articles. A guy from the Atlanta Journal wrote a good article, Robert Thoreau. And the academic community, we are blessed with Dr. Petty. There's a young lady out in Indiana, Dr. Valerie Graham, who has done a lot of work. Her parents were part of the suit, and she has did a lot of writing about the case. And I also want to there's a young lady down in Arkansas by the name of Beverly Briquette. And in Beverly case, she worked for USDA. She was fired. Two federal marshals came to her job, escorted her off USDA property. She was a farm supervisor. And, you know, the employment side is just as bad as the farmer's side. And I hope she has a case pending now in federal court. And I hope the Biden administration would do her justice.
Well, we certainly hope and pray that we do. I know I have a special treat with you now living in Washington, North Carolina, and for our viewers, that's the original Washington, the first Washington in America. And this is a record that I found at the State Archives. You and I both love sweet potatoes. And down east in North Carolina is known as the #1 producer of sweet potatoes in the world.
Yeah.
And most of that is done in eastern North Carolina. And I found a record that could lend toward your research, and also Dr. Petty, we were talking about this, and I thought it'd be interesting to share this. This is a receipt, essentially, of 988 bushels of sweet potatoes from Washington, North Carolina, bound for New York City in October 1783. And this is very significant, but this is literally 1 month at the end of the Revolutionary War and the Paris Treaty, which if you know much about growing sweet potatoes, you know you have to put in a whole season and prepare them in the field. And how interesting that must have been to grow those sweet potatoes and have them ready at the same time that all these hostilities are going on. So I wanted to share this with you in particular from the John Gray Blunt papers at the State Archives of North Carolina. And I'll get a copy of this to you, Dr. Petty, for your research. But I want to thank you, Dr. Petty, again for what you're doing. Keep up the good work. And we look forward to working with you some more. And Mr. Tim Pigford, I can't thank you enough. We can't thank you enough for the courage and the tenacity to stand fast for justice, for human rights. This is not a civil right. This is human rights for everybody. Yeah. Because farmers matter, and farmers are vanishing, whether they're white, black, Indian. We need as many farmers as we can get. And as one farmer to another, I owe you, as you mentioned, you said the only way that you would do this interview is if I brought you 2 watermelons from my farm. And I will let you know that they are being seeded. We're going to get them out and we're going to get them to you. And I'm going to trade 2 of the watermelons that you get for your grandsons and for those 2 watermelons.
And a granddaughter, 1 granddaughter, 1 grandson.
Oh, I'm sorry, 1 granddaughter, 1 grandson. I'm sorry.
Marlon,
2 watermelons nonetheless. 2 watermelons nonetheless. And for that correction, Dr. Petty, you get 2 for you and your family. Well, great. Well, this is great. Environmental justice. Black People, Green Planet. Mr. Tim Pigford, world famous farmer, Eastern North Carolina. Dr. Adrienne Petty, friend and colleague at the College of William and Mary. Keep up that great work.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
again. Thank you. And thank you again for joining us at the 21st Annual African American Cultural Celebration, Environmental Justice, Black People, Green Planet. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining us for the 21st Annual African American Cultural Celebration. Have a great day.